Hello and welcome to the Memory Capsule podcast, where we interview members of the Pokemon trading card game community. My name is Rafal Gladys. Each week we speak with our guests about their background with Pokemon TCG, how they got involved with the game, and give them an opportunity to share their love of the game. Today's guest is Andrew Hedrick. Andrew has been on an absolute tear in the past year. In 2022, he placed top 32 at Indianapolis Regionals, top 64 at NAIC, and top 8 at Peoria Regionals. Most recently, Andrew has won not just one, but two back-to-back regional championships at Orlando and Knoxville. Andrew has joined an elite group of players, becoming just the sixth person to win back-to-back regionals in the modern era. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing good. Excited to be on the podcast.
Of course, and I'm glad to be with you. I appreciate it. I'm sure many of our listeners have become pretty familiar with your name in the last month. Outside of your recent accolades, what would you want people to know about you?
I guess I'm a freshman at college, studying at the University of Iowa. Um, I don't know. Outside of Pokemon, I like to watch sports a lot, hang out with my friends sometimes, but don't do too much other stuff outside of Pokemon because definitely have to put some time into that as well.
Definitely, and that's definitely a subject we're gonna touch on a little bit. To just kind of get us started, I'm gonna kind of ask you the question we ask all of our guests: what is your favorite card of all time?
I think I would have to go with Baby Blacephalon,
Hmm,
Fireball Circus. I really like playing that deck a lot online, especially like during COVID. That kind of got me back into the game.
gotcha. How did you get involved with the game? You just said you kind of got back into it. Did you start playing and then take a break for a while?
Yeah, so I definitely like when I was younger, I would play a little bit. My parents got me some cards. My friends at school would play it, but I definitely wasn't very good. Then I think around like 2017 or 2018, when I was in seniors, I started attending some regionals. Uh, Still wasn't super good then, and then I aged up into masters the COVID year. Like COVID happened in the middle of that year, and I wasn't playing too much. I got a job. I was focusing more on like school and stuff to keep my grades up, but
Hmm.
then once COVID happened, I kind of didn't have that much to do. And so my friends started messaging me about like some of the early online tournaments, like the Limitless qualifiers that they ran initially. And so I started to like figure out, get back into the game a little bit, figure out what was going on, and then definitely kept my interest since then.
Would you say then that playing online was one of the major factors that helped you accelerate your growth as a player?
Oh yeah, for sure, because I definitely like just getting a lot of games in general just like really helps you understand both like that current meta and just like generally how the game works overall. And I was able to get a lot of games in over that time, and that definitely helped me get better.
If anyone is listening and is also looking to improve as a player, what advice would you give them outside of just playing a ton? What did you have like a work ethic that went along with just the sheer amount of games you were playing?
I definitely think like it's important to, even if like, maybe you have some bad luck in a game, something doesn't go your way, it's still important to like think back on your games and maybe like think about what you could have done better. Like, sure, you might have still not been in the best spot, but you could have maybe made a better decision instead of just blaming everything that goes wrong on luck, which is something that I feel like a lot of players have a problem with.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill that a lot of people need to work on. I think Azul just recently mentioned that one of the biggest issues that players have is just not admitting that they made a mistake and always blaming it on, my draws, my opponent,
Yeah.
etc., etc.
So yeah, not just playing a lot of games, but also once you play those games, make sure you're thinking about the decisions you made and if they were right or wrong, each of the games that you played.
Did you have like a community that was helping you also grow as a player? You said your friends kind of got you back in the game. Is that the friends you made when you were first starting to play, or is this a friend group you made during your return to the game?
Yeah, so I definitely met a lot of different people during online that I still will definitely talk to over deck ideas and run some games with before regionals and stuff. So yeah, I definitely was able to meet a lot of people, a lot of really good players during online, and that definitely helped me out as well.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Let's then dive a little bit deeper into some of those regionals runs. And before we get into the very recent ones, I want to talk a little bit about your top eight at Peoria Regionals. Did
Okay.
your finish at that event kind of change the way you saw yourself as a player? Like kind of finally seeing like kind of the fruits of all your work culminating in a top eight at a pretty large regionals. Did that affect the way you viewed the game and your approach to the game?
Yeah, it definitely gave me, I would say, more confidence in my abilities and stuff because once you see that you're able to compete with the best players, beat some of them in that kind of setting and place really well, that kind of like gives you confidence in yourself and makes you think, well, if I play my cards right and I do make the right decisions, you can beat pretty much everyone. So
Yeah, because obviously, all of us have been on pretty big online streaks sometimes playing some decks, but nothing feels quite as good as that, you know, real life validation of just knowing like I
right,
can do this. I am a good player.
right, because yeah, out of regional, especially once you get to the top tables, you have to definitely compete against some really good players. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're playing all the people that were the resources you were having to try to grow as a player, right? All these big name players. Then moving a little bit forward towards Orlando Regionals, which, as far as I understand, it was the largest regionals like non-Japanese of all time. Is that correct?
yeah, I think that's what I've heard as well. It's definitely a really big event for sure. Because I think there was a few things that went to that. Like I know I only went because the flights were really cheap, so I think probably that helped a lot of people get there as well.
Yeah, I remember looking at it a few months ahead of time. I was like, oh, like 150 bucks for Orlando, like that's pretty that's pretty tempting, right?
Yeah, I think I paid like $90 for my flight or something like that.
Oh,
So it was
wow, there you
definitely
go, awesome. And
yeah,
a lot of people are saying, well, worst case scenario, I bomb day one, I'll go to Disney, right? Like there's a
right.
not the
There's
worst
stuff
place
to
to
do
be.
for sure.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. So we make it to this event. I think there's just about 1,500 masters attending. What goes into planning for an event like that? Does that affect your deck choices? The possibility that you could play against literally anything?
So I would say like most of the really big events, like most of the regionals in America and stuff, I feel like you have to just focus on making sure that your deck works and is consistent because you can't try to like beat everything. You have to just because you don't really know exactly what you're going to face against. It's important that when you face good players and good decks that you will have an opportunity to set up every game. Like, you can't account for everything, but as long as you make your deck able to work, then you can usually give yourself a chance in most matchups.
Oh, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Could you give us a bit of a rundown of Orlando? Obviously, I'm sure that you played 18 rounds, so if you don't remember every single round, that's totally fine. Are there any ones that were particularly memorable that when it comes to Orlando?
Yeah, for sure. So I got my matches pulled up and stuff. There was one round in day one. I was on 6-1 and I was against Nathan Ginsburg. He was playing like a turbo lost zone Mirage Gate deck that could turn one attack, knock out Lugia V and stuff. And so that matchup was definitely really scary. I was still trying to figure out how to play that matchup on the fly because I didn't get to test that much against that before the event. And ended up like a lot of games that matchup was like the games are sometimes decided on turn one. He was able to pull off a big Mirage Gate attack one of the games, but luckily in game three he wasn't quite able to put it all together. But that matchup was definitely scary for sure. I think he was a card away from being able to take a turn one knockout
Yeah,
on my
sometimes they
Lugia.
get the turn one Dragon Knight, and it's like, oh, what do I
Right,
even do there?
right. If you're only able to get up one Lugia and they knock it out, then yeah, it's
Exactly.
pretty much game over there. So that was definitely a scary game matchup. Day one, but overall day one went pretty well for me. I was able to get to 8-1. Then into day two, I did take a loss to Azul on control in the first round of day two. Put me down to 8-2. It kind of put me in like a little more pressure on myself to do well the rest of my rounds. Couldn't afford to lose much more. But after that, I was able to pull out some sets and make it into bubble into top cut at eighth. I did naturally tie my last round, but that barely got me into top eight, eighth seed bubble.
And then in the top eight, I mean, obviously you won you won in the end. How was the top eight run?
We'll face three good players for sure, which definitely makes it a little bit harder. But all three of those sets went to game three. First one was against Reagan. We were playing Lugia Mirror. Game three, I was able to knock out his only Lugia turn two because I went first, and that kind of just ended the game on the spot. So felt a little bad for him with that one, but yeah, definitely had a pretty good hand at opening that game to pull that one out. But then into top four, I faced Nicholas Moffat, and that set was very close. He was playing Raikou Rayquaza, and I was playing Wash Water Energy, which is very useful in that matchup. It means if you put on your Manaphy, then they can't Raikou and they can't save while I kill your Manaphy,
Hmm.
which makes it really hard for them to do anything, especially because he actually didn't play Boss's Orders, if I remember right. So he could never kill my Manaphy. So he was basically stuck just hitting whatever was active or whatever he escape roped and I promoted. And in games 1 and 2, I wasn't able to set that up because I only got out one Archeops. Didn't have the best hands turn to. But then I lost one of those games, but I won one of those games, got it to game 3. And in game 3, I had the perfect setup, Wash Energy my Manaphy, and was able to squeeze that one out at the end on the last turn.
And then the finals were against Isaiah Bradner. Definitely a pretty nerve-wracking series as well.
Yeah, for sure. Games 1 and 2 were fairly close. It felt like we both kind of had a chance in those games, but the person going first was able to pull it out because both times the person going first, I think, got a pretty good setup. And then game 3, I had a good turn 1 and 2, had a pretty good setup, but I was still thinking like, what, he could pull off something here, make me have to, make some good plays or get a little lucky with my draws. But then I see him go Evolution Incense Pass, and then that just like I was putting everything together, making sure I had everything right, and I was able to just win the game on that turn.
Yeah, and then yeah, pretty memorable moment. We saw Isaiah Chevelle with the playmat of your victory moment
Yeah.
at Knoxville. Um, Now, when it comes to that Lugia list, it had a couple unconventional cards, or about as unconventional as Lugia can really get. Had a Capturing Aroma, an Echoing Horn, and a Wash Energy. You already kind of mentioned the Wash Energy. Would you say that those cards were pretty useful, or were they just kind of cute inclusions that you had at the end of the day?
So, I mean, Water Energy was decent against Nick Moffat. Like in every other match, it was just a colorless energy, which isn't terrible because you do need just to accelerate sometimes colorless energies. But mostly for that matchup, I would say it was overall a decent card, but it wasn't like super amazing. Echo Horn, I barely used at all. I used it like maybe one time the entire tournament. For a major play, I guess only one time against Gudra was able to just knock out his Gudra that was in the discard pile and basically end the game there,
Mm.
which was cool. But overall, I don't think Echo Horn was too amazing. I kind of put it at the last minute because I had Canceling Cone in my deck, but then like in testing, I didn't really feel like it was actually super easy to use or doing too much. So switched it for an Echo Horn because that card was good against Arctura, could be useful in other matchups like Gudra, sometimes like Lugia Mirror if you were able to pull it off, but I never was actually able to pull it off in the Lugia Mirror, so wasn't super great on the weekend. And then Capture Room, I guess that like it was just kind of another consistency card. It ended up being big in the finals actually. I flipped a heads on turn that let me get the second Archeops in the
Hmm.
discard pile, which was definitely good. And I did feel like on most of the times I did like it was an important flip. It did go my way, which was definitely a little bit lucky. But I feel like it was just kind of another consistency card. On turn 1, it could be good a lot of times with heads or tails because it could get you Archeops in the discard pile, could get you Lugia on your board. And overall, it was a pretty good card, but not needed in the deck or anything.
Yeah, like it always gets you something, right? It's not like it ever
Right.
fails for a search, so it's always something, just not always
Yeah.
exactly what you need.
And at the beginning of the game, like there's a lot of situations where they're both useful, so
Definitely,
not
exactly.
terrible.
Now, moving forward, just about a week later, OCIC is going on. Knoxville Regionals is coming up. I remember reading that Knoxville was a bit of a last minute decision for you. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so like coming like in the month leading up to the event, my friends have been talking about driving up in a car. I still wasn't sure about it. I was like trying to figure out my school situation and stuff. But then like the week before, I learned that there was still a spot in the car, and so I decided to try to sign up on the Monday night when they reopened registration, and I was able to get in some of the few slots that they had open. And so I signed up and decided to join them in their road trip from Iowa to Tennessee for
Wow.
Knoxville.
How long was that?
Maybe around like 12 or 13 hours, something like that.
Okay, could be worse. For a Midwesterner, right? We're used to that, getting to
Yeah,
events
it
that
was,
long.
yeah, way cheaper than flying too, which was definitely a positive.
Yes, I remember looking at flights to Knoxville, and I was like, huh, that is surprisingly expensive for a kind of a smaller city,
Yeah, definitely wouldn't have gone if there wasn't a spot open for me in the car.
for sure. Did you feel any sort of pressure to perform after having just won Orlando, or were you just like, I'm just going to do my best, we'll see how it goes?
So one thing is after Orlando, I did go to one Chicago 1K. That was my only tournament in between, and I didn't do super well at that. I missed top cut, so I wasn't feeling quite as hyped up on my performance. But so definitely was a little bit nervous going to Knoxville. But I was I don't know. I didn't feel too bad going to Knoxville. I
Mhm.
felt like I had a pretty good shot.
For sure. And as the Knoxville tournament went on, we saw that you were doing pretty dang well, right? You were a coming very close to the 15-0 run. It topped out at 13-0. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. At what point did that run start feeling like kind of at what point did you kind of start looking at your score and thinking this could really happen? And did it start kind of the pressure start coming on the idea of getting going 15-0, or are you just chilling? You're like, well, I have so many wins, I basically guarantee top cut. 15-0, whatever. We'll see how it goes. How are you feeling at that point?
Right. So I would say like I think a lot of the pressure actually came off like once they got to, 12 and 0 or something like that. I was just kind of like at that point I was like I'm already locked for cut. I'm just gonna play for fun, but not gonna like spend too much mental energy. Like I'll try to get the 15 and I'll try to win my rounds, but if it doesn't happen, I'm not gonna be too concerned about it. I was just trying to make sure I'd be ready for top eight.
Gotcha. The responsible choice, probably, instead of just sweating trying to go 15-0.
Yeah.
Last week when I was talking to Finn Lynch, he was talking about his run at Salt Lake City last year on Suicune, and he was saying that he basically experienced like what people call like a flow state in sports, where just everything just lines up perfectly. It feels like you know your deck like the back of your hand. Everything's just going right. Every decision feels right. Is that what it felt like when you just kind of kept winning, or were the games more of a grind every single round?
I mean, it definitely did kind of feel like one each like maybe at the start of games I was, it kind of felt like a little bit of a grind, but once I got like, a few turns into the game, then I would kind of just be like playing my cards. I like kind of knew what I was doing. I was just completely focused on the game and everything did seem to be kind of going my way. So that was definitely good up until round 14 at least.
What did you end up hitting at around 14?
I hit Brandon Salazar again. I had already hit him in day one as well, so the second time I faced him, was able to beat him in day one, was not able to beat him in day two. He did get me with some judges into some not the best hands. Tried to read the wind to get out of it, but he was able to get his Eternatus up and kind of control the game from there. So
Yeah. So you played him. You had basically a best of nine with him over the
yeah,
weekend.
yeah, played him three times, which was
Wow, that's wild. When it comes to playing so many long tournaments, and obviously not everyone's making it to their 18th best of three, is there anything you do or anything that you think helps you kind of get through the mental side of such a long event? I mean, even day one can just be incredibly draining, especially for players who aren't accustomed to going to regionals. Do you do anything to prepare yourself for such a long event, or have you done anything like any activities in the past that you think have helped you kind of persevere through such a long tournament?
um I don't know, I think definitely making sure you keep drinking water and stuff and eat over lunch break. I think that's pretty important. Definitely helps me stay because I do remember when seniors one time I went to NAIC and I did not like eat or drink anything throughout the day and my performance kept getting worse and worse. So then ever since then I've kind of tried to make sure, staying hydrated and stuff throughout the day, which I do think that definitely helps out.
Hmm.
Um, and then like also I think during your games, keeping track of time in general is pretty important because during like at a long tournament it can kind of all blend together. You kind of lose track of time, but to make sure you avoid ties because I was able to do that the entire tournament. I think that's one of the best ways you can do well is if you are able to avoid ties.
Mm.
Because
So just
like
keeping up that
over
pace of play.
yeah, because you need so many match points to make top cut. A tie is pretty bad to take at any point until it's like getting you locked into top cut or anything.
Yeah, I mean, at an event as big as like Orlando or Knoxville, if you make day two at 6-2-1, you basically have to like go like was it 5-0-1 day two to make cut?
Right. And even then, like at Orlando, there was people who made it to 11-2-2 or whatever, and they didn't make top cut. I was lucky I did, but some people didn't. So even then, you can't be entirely guaranteed on 11-2-2.
Yeah. What would you say is your most memorable match from Knoxville?
Um, Let me pull up my Knoxville matchup. So Oh, the, potentially even the finals maybe against Salazar on his Eternatus deck because he'd already played a couple of times. Uh, but I don't think neither of our sets had been as close as that one. But we both knew each other's decks. We both kind of knew what we were going to try to do. But I feel like the games were both pretty close in the finals. Game one, I was just barely able to pull out, and game two, I don't think was quite as close, but it still definitely came down to the end. And I don't know when you're playing in finals and both games, they were pretty long games too. I feel like we were already pretty low on time if we had to go to a game three. So
Hmm.
definitely like super long games that kind of come down to the end uh, for finals. That definitely is pretty memorable.
For sure, super high intensity, and then obviously getting your second regionals win in 3 weeks, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Do you think that having all this recent success has, I kind of mentioned already with the top eight at Peoria, but have these 2 wins changed your expectations for yourself this season and where you want to see yourself long term as a player?
Well, definitely like short term for this year. I think I'm gonna try to get global top 16 now. Just registered for EUIC today at 3 a.m.
Oh, you made it through all the registration
Yeah, I stayed up till
battles.
3 a.m. to make sure I would get in because I wanted to give myself all three tries if I had missed any of them. But I was luckily able to get in on the first one, and then yeah. So I definitely am gonna be trying to go to that one. Trying to go for top 16 if I can get a few more good placements. Uh, And then I guess I would say for the long term, definitely I would say like put some more expectations on myself in general. Like, I know I can do this, so make sure I, practice. Don't make too many mistakes. Make sure I'm ready for the future and for other events.
Yeah, for sure. And best of luck at EUIC. That's a post rotation, right?
Yeah, haven't looked too much at that for me yet, but definitely in the coming weeks gonna have to make sure I figure out something for that.
Gotcha. Lugia stays good, so you could always be a single strike Lugia player.
Yeah, gonna have to see how consistent it is. That's one of the decks I'm definitely gonna be testing
That's
out though.
true. That's a deck where you might want to play multiple capturing aroma. So you got some
Yeah,
experience
because
with that
we
already.
lose some of our search cards, so yeah, it might have to be quite in the deck.
Oh yeah. Now, would you mind if I asked you a couple questions about Lugia? Because you're pretty good at the deck. You have some pretty good success with it. Do you mind if I ask a few questions that some people might be wondering about the deck?
Yeah, sure.
I think one of the kind of little contentious things that have come up online about Lugia is the mirror match. Where do you kind of land on the spectrum of, actually, this is a high skill mirror match that both players really have to think through versus, no, 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 it's just a coin flip. If you go first, you win as long as you don't brick. Where do you see yourself on that continuum?
I think it's definitely somewhere in the middle because if both players like get a decent start, but not like extremely strong hitting everything, but both of them get set up with, both Archeops on board, they're like then I think then it will definitely be really close and it will come down to the plays you can make. But there's a lot of games that that doesn't happen in. And then in those games, obviously, there's not too much strategy. Maybe a little bit here and there, but most if someone gets a big lead, it's obviously going to be pretty hard for each decision to make a big difference. But in the games where person going first, they get set up, but they only take one prize. Maybe the person going second only had to bench one Lugia. Uh, they don't, and but the other person wasn't able to kill it. Then you get your Lugia up, and then it's like each player's trying to find some advantage on like either energies or on prizes to try to make up the difference. Especially if you're the person who's behind by one prize, but you're definitely not out of it at that point. So I would say if both players get a reasonable setup, then I think definitely skill, but there's a lot of games that doesn't happen.
For sure. Yeah, some games your opponent gets one Lugia, you go first, you knock it out, and they go to game two, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's also another interesting thing, actually. Like determining if you want to bench one or two Lugias, like a lot of times based on like what your opponent did turn one, it's definitely pretty hard to figure out what you should do.
Yeah, I mean, is there any intricacies about the Lugia mirror that you would want to maybe enlighten some of our listeners about that might think that it's just down to the coin flip?
Um, like I guess you have to look for ways to take extra prizes a lot of times without your opponent taking extra prizes. So like, pulling off Raikou plays, you can pull off Stoutland for the last two prizes of the game sometimes. Um, maybe try to like you can try to kill their Luminion, and also if you have to bench Luminion, then you want to get off the board. But then you also run into some issues where if you take Luminion off the like use Luminion's attack to get it off the board, but you don't have enough energy on the board, then if your opponent could boss an Archeops and you could be in a rough spot. So there's definitely a lot of like stuff you have to keep track of too in terms of that. And even I still don't understand entirely all of it, but there's a lot of stuff to keep track of it. But I think probably the main thing is making sure to limit the amount of opportunities your opponent has to take extra prizes and to try to find ones to do it yourself.
Hmm. So a lot of it revolves around kind of mapping out your win conditions while trying to minimize your opponent's.
Right, right. And one of the main ones is figuring out how to take extra prizes without giving your opponent the opportunity to do the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. I appreciate that. What matchup would you say is kind of the most complex for Lugia to deal with? The one that's not necessarily just like the hardest to beat, but the one that requires the most thinking and the most maneuvering to outplay that archetype.
I think the Lost Box, like Raikou Rayquaza deck, or like just any of the decks with Raikou and Sableye in them, that definitely is like a really interesting matchup to play, especially if you don't have Wash Water Energy. Because, like, I played that matchup a couple times at Knoxville. I didn't play Wash Water at that tournament. I thought more people would be on like the Azul Lost Box deck, which is not super important against or anything. But I did actually hit it a couple times. Like I hit someone early in day one, and I also hit Nick Moffat in day two on that deck. And so that matchup, there's definitely a lot of thinking. You have to use your Manaphy, but eventually they'll kill Manaphy, so you really have to try to avoid letting them Raikou for multiple prizes. Um, you also want to kind of set up Stoutland. Sometimes, like a lot of times, you want to save Stoutland for your last two prize cards with a boss, so they don't get an opportunity to take two prize cards back on it. Um, there's a lot of moving parts in that matchup for sure, and I feel like both players like have an opportunity to make mistakes that the other person can capitalize on.
Definitely, that is definitely really interesting. Yeah, because a lot of people, early on, people were saying, "Oh, you should bench Stoutland early, just try to run them down with the Stoutland." Then people were saying, "No, save it for the end. It should be your finisher. It'll get knocked out," because people were starting to play Lost Box lists with more things that can just one shot a
Right.
Stoutland.
Yeah, if your opponent gets a good start, you usually don't want to go into it turn two and give them an opportunity to just trade two for two. Then you kind of lost all the advantage it gave you.
Hmm.
So,
What would you say is kind of the number one mistake that the average Lugia player is making? For anyone who wants to get better at playing the deck and maybe is struggling, what do you think that people are missing when they play it?
um, I feel like really keeping track of like how many prizes you give your opponent and stuff is definitely important, especially like in the Lugia mirror. Making sure you aren't giving your opponent as too many opportunities for extra prizes, or like against the Lost Box decks, making sure you're not giving them multi-prize turns and stuff. There's definitely like just trying to limit like your opponent's opportunities to take knockouts and stuff. I feel like a lot of players will just bench, Luminion, they'll bench a few Lugias, like especially in the early rounds of tournaments. I'll definitely run into people who don't manage like the Pokemon they put on the board too well. So I feel like that's definitely something
Hmm.
people should try to keep track of and like avoid giving your opponent the opportunity to take extra prizes.
So a lot of this kind of revolves around knowing which attackers you're using in all of the matchups, really, because you have the opportunity to use two prize attackers, one prize attackers, of varying energy,
Yeah.
requirements. So there's just so many options that sometimes it can be easy to choose the wrong one.
I guess that's another thing too. Like keeping track of like which energy you need to use and stuff is definitely something that's pretty important. And it feels like sometimes people don't use like save the energy they need, or they use an attacker that uses up all their energy that they might need. Like maybe they need to pull off a Raikou, but they use up their Auroras or something, and then they can't do it. So
Hmm.
definitely also making sure that you're keeping track of the energy you're going to need to pull out the game. It's important.
In terms of kind of the average Lugia list, what would you as a Lugia savant say that maybe is like the most underrated card in the list? What's something that people often kind of undersell the strength of in the deck?
So a lot of people I know have gone to three gust effects, like three boss or two boss, one Serena. I really like having four in my deck. I played three boss, one Serena at Knoxville, and I do think having three boss is really good. But also I feel like having access to more gust effects so you don't have to use Luminion to find it, which can definitely be a liability a lot of times, is just really good in a lot of matchups. Uh, Against Mew, you want to gust a lot sometimes. In the Lugia Mirror, just raw drawing into bosses. Against Lost Zone, having a lot of bosses can be good. It feels like just having a lot of access to gust effects. So I would definitely play 3 boss, but I would also consider adding a Serena as well as the fourth one.
Hmm, okay. Now, on the other hand, what's the most overrated card in Lugia?
Um, I'm not a super big fan of Dunsparce in the deck, to be honest. I did not play at Orlando, and I didn't regret it. At Knoxville, I did play it, but that was only because I saw Vikavolt was really hyped coming out of EUIC. I mean, not OCIC, which is definitely like something I was a little bit concerned about. I tested the matchup a lot, and with Dunsparce, it was a pretty close matchup. It meant you could, read the wind a couple of times, maybe try to figure out, like, get a good setup off of that, because your opponent usually can't kill your Dunsparce super early, and then you would, or like if they killed your Dunsparce, but you were able to Lugia then and summoning star back Dunsparce, that would a lot of times just seal the matchup too. If you could summon star back, one Archeops and Dunsparce, power up a big Lugia VStar. They can't kill your Lugia VStar in one hit with Dunsparce in place. That's also a pretty strong play against them. So I did put it in my deck because I was worried about Vikavolt. If people aren't playing Vikavolt, it doesn't do very much. I don't feel like it's decent against Regigigas, but that matchup's like already winnable without it, and even with it, I think it's more like a 50-50. It's not super good. So I feel like if you aren't worried about Vikavolt at all, I'd probably consider cutting that card.
Hmm, okay. And now everyone's about to play no Dunsparce at the next regionals, and Vikavolt's gonna go crazy at Vancouver.
Yeah, I was glad to have it at Knoxville because I did hit 2 Vikavolt, but outside of that matchup, I didn't use it like at all. So
Mentioning Vikavolt is actually really helpful here because my next question was kind of about the counters to Lugia. So we know Lugia can hypothetically prepare for any counter. Is there kind of a critical mass of counters that could build up in an event that could lead Lugia to be a bad pick? Or is the deck just so versatile, so strong? Are the counters just never really good enough that Lugia can really just beat anything, no matter how many people are trying to beat it? Or is there a point at which Lugia could actually become a bad call if everyone's trying to counter it?
I mean, I feel like there's so many different players that these tournaments playing so many different decks. I feel like it's pretty unlikely that there would be enough counters to where it's bad, especially because, like you said, Lugia has so many options to beat the different counters. Like whatever they like, some people will play some counter outs to counter some. Like you can play Bird Keeper, Escape Rope for paralysis. You can play Dunsparce for the lightning decks, stuff like that. So I feel like it's pretty unlikely that it would ever be a bad play for an event, at least in this format.
Mm-hmm. Now, kind of going off of that, when it comes to you choosing Lugia as a deck, is that how much of it is you just personally really enjoy playing the deck versus it just consistently happens to be the right call for every event you're going to?
So one thing that I think is like that I really like to do is I like to play one deck and get like good at it, play a lot of events with it, practice with it. So uh, that's like the main reason I've stuck with it, to be honest. I feel like worrying less about like making the perfect call for an event, especially like it makes more sense at like a local event or something, where people's decks, then it makes sense to try to figure out the best play. But when you're going to a regional, I mean, there's so many different decks. The meta generally stays pretty consistent, like in the different percentages. I feel like just making sure that you really know how to play your deck and you're not going to be making too many mistakes every round. I mean, you'll definitely like there's definitely lots of opportunities even when you do know your deck to make mistakes, but when you don't, it's going to be way worse, and you'll probably tie more as well if you don't know like some of the interactions just like on default because you have to think more. So I feel like I I've just been playing Lugia the entire time. I haven't played other decks really at all. I've still never played a Lost Zone deck in my life. So I feel like just making sure I've been mostly playing it because I feel like I like perfecting my play at one deck rather than playing a bunch of different ones.
Mm-hmm. Is that the advice you might give other players? Like if someone went to you and I said, "Oh, I've been playing Reggie's all format, but Lugia seems so good, but I feel way more comfortable on Reggie's." Would you say, "No, no, Lugia's so good, you should really play Lugia," or would you say, "Stick with the thing that you're most comfortable with"?
Yeah, unless like for some reason there was a lot of decks like adding Ice Cube or something as the Regigigas Techer. I don't exactly know what that Regigigas players are worried about because I also haven't played that deck at all. But I feel like if unless you're worried about like a bunch of counters showing up, then I feel like I would just stick with the deck that you know how to play
Hmm.
because I feel like again you'll play it better. And all of the decks in this format that are popular are pretty good decks if they're played well. So
Yeah. I think I forget what podcast or interview or something it was, but I think Celio's network, Luke Mursa, was saying something that because of the point in the format we're at now, where the block that we're playing with is so large, every deck essentially just does something broken. And as long as you're playing some kind of deck with some sort of broken ability, you can get some wins out of it, and you can be pretty successful because every deck right now is able to do something crazy.
right, yeah, it feels like most matchups you're not excited to see because you know there's something that they can pull out against you. You're not, at least as Lugia, you're not too hyped to see any deck. It feels like.
Yeah, no one's playing Sable's Art anymore, right? It's Seal Stone, it's Rayquaza, everything's one
Right.
shotting each other, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now when it comes to the Lugia list itself, just like as a deck archetype, do you think the deck has a whole lot of flexibility, and is there room for kind of the more unorthodox variants? Like, just like some examples, in Knoxville, Danny Barr, I got top 16 with Lugia Flying Pikachu. I think Tord played it as well at some events. Lugia with Vikavolt V and Zapdos won Bokum. There's been Lugia Greedent decks that have made top 16 at a couple regionals. Do you think that these are like underexplored variants that are just flying under the radar, or has the optimal list just kind of been the standard one, or these are more outliers and just really good players playing these outlier lists?
So yeah, I'm definitely not the biggest fan of Pika. I've watched like some games like with people playing it or playing against it. I feel like you have a lot of limitations on what you can do, and your opponent kind of like has a lot more control of how the game goes. I feel like you don't have a bunch of broken one prize attackers that you can just completely mess up their prize trade with and stuff. So I feel like I'm definitely not the biggest fan of that deck, but I mean, Pika is definitely also really good in some matchups, but then in the matchups where it's not as good, you have a way less options. And then some of the other decks, I don't. Greedent's actually okay. I feel like I haven't played it at all, but I can understand the concept. It seems like it could be really good against Lost Zone and stuff sometimes. So I can understand that one. But
Mm,
I feel like generally just making your deck more consistent again is what I would do. Like more consistent at what it can do, what you want to do with it, which is get up your Lugia and Archeops turn 2, and then have a bunch of different attackers you can power up based on the situation.
gotcha. So then, when it comes to the deck building decisions you make, if you're kind of going for the playing Lugia as consistently as possible, how many spaces do you really see in the deck for techs, and how much thought do you put into making those decisions? Because if there's only 3 or 4 spots, does that really stress you out, kind of looking at the potential meta and deciding what to put in those slots, or do you feel pretty comfortable usually with the lists you land on?
Yeah, there's definitely not too many slots in the deck. I feel like for my Knoxville list, you could cut Dunsparce, you could cut a third VStar. Speed Energy is also cuttable, but like Speed Energy also would have to be replaced by an Energy. I feel like you really want 16 Energy in the deck. So um, yeah, there's not too many slots, but again, like also there's not too many decks. I feel like you have to be super worried about because you have a like Lugia kind of just has a bunch of decent matchups against everything. It feels like so. I guess like if you're really worried about paralysis, then you gotta probably cut Dunsparce or something, figure out like Fit Escape over Birdkeeper. But yeah, I feel like there's only a few slots, but also there's not that much stuff that you need to hard tech for or anything because most matchups you're already fine against. So
Yeah, and some of the
I don't
bigger
think it's
matchups, you just play one tech and it can swing it like a pretty fair amount of percentage points your way.
yeah. One card I would definitely not put on my Lugia deck is Drapion. I feel like that card doesn't do anything.
Hmm. How do you, in that case, if you don't mind me asking, how do you approach the Mew matchup? Do you just try to blast through their Mews, or when you're playing 4 Gusts, are you just going after all the Drapion?
Uh, yeah, it definitely depends on the board state you get into. A lot of times you can just use them. You can also sometimes use Raikou depending on how it goes. Like if they bench Oricorio, you could kill Oricorio and hit a Mew, especially if they uh like depending on the price trade and stuff. Sometimes that can be really good against them. Or if you hit a Mew VMAX and then they don't take it off the board, you could maybe Raikou kill Mew VMAX, kill Oricorio, or kill Mew VMAX, hit their other Mew, especially if they already evolved it or something. And they can't easily just evolve a different one. So Raikou can definitely also be good in that matchup. Or like sometimes you can just if you maybe take a 2 prize knockout early, then you can just boss 2 times per game. There's a bunch of different options that you can do, but one thing you do have to keep in mind also is that they can psychic leap, which sometimes can be annoying if you're trying to go for two shots.
Hmm.
So gusts can a lot of times be important if they're trying to like psychic leap a lot too.
Gotcha. Have you had any opportunities to play against some of like Xander Perot's concoctions, like the Dreepy lock deck?
The Dreepy would definitely be scary for the Knoxville list I played because I didn't play any switch outs at all. If you play any switch outs, you should be fine in that matchup. But I feel like for my deck, it'd definitely be a pretty bad matchup. If they judge path you, well, you kind of have to bench Pumpkaboo unless you somehow draw into your one vacuum by itself, which isn't very likely. And then he could definitely pull off the Dreepy. So that matchup would definitely be pretty scary. I was happy to not ever have to face him at Knoxville. But if you put in a switch out, you should be fine because you could like either like Bird Keeper and then Raikou kill Dreepy or something on the bench. And I don't think he had any way to recover it at all. So
Yeah, I
that
don't
would
think
just
he played
instant.
Silene or anything, so I guess if you knocked it out, it's done.
Right. So yeah, if you played any switch outs, you would be fine in that matchup at all. But I did not. So it definitely would have been scary to if I had to face him at the tournament.
Do you think there's any creative Lugia counters still kind of lurking in the shadows for the next couple regionals, or do you think everything's kind of been exhausted and people are just innovating what's already been made?
I mean, I wouldn't be too surprised if someone came up with something. I think probably still one of the best ways is paralysis. Even with one switch out, you can a lot of different paralysis stuff can still beat Lugia. It just doesn't make it like a free win anymore if you play switch outs. But most people don't play two or anything, so I wouldn't be surprised if paralysis decks like even if other decks started putting in paralysis stuff into their deck, like Lost Zone could potentially play like can play paralysis stuff sometimes. So, but I don't know if there's anything like too crazy. The Dreepy is definitely surprising, but I don't know if there'll be anything like that the rest of the format.
Yeah, I mean we'll see what Xander's cooking up, right? You never we never know at this point.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of the all of the different decks you've played in your history, you mentioned that Baby Blounds was a very memorable deck for you. Is Lugia? Would you say that Lugia is kind of the peak of power of all the decks you've played, and the deck you've enjoyed playing the most, or do you have kind of another favorite that you find very memorable?
So I guess Lugia is kind of reminiscent somewhat of Tapu Bulu, which I also really liked playing when I was in seniors. That did get me to a top cut in seniors one time, which was pretty exciting for me. That was the first time I'd ever been in top cut at a regional. So Tapu Bulu is definitely a deck I really enjoyed, and Lugia is somewhat similar to Tapu Bulu. I think it's a little bit more broken,
A
but
little, just a little bit, right?
yeah. But I like the decks like in general where you can kind of do stuff in one turn, right? Lugia, you can charge up an attacker in one turn. Same with Tapu Bulu. Blacephalon, you could do the same thing with Welder. Uh, so in general I like the decks where you kind of like you can react each turn and choose like the attacker that you need to use that turn instantly instead of needing to kind of plan ahead because then your opponent can play around it a little bit more.
Yeah. So is that kind of why like Lost Box doesn't necessarily appeal to you the same way because you have to not that you don't have obviously you have the skill to think multiple turns ahead, but it is obviously games can go a lot smoother if you don't have to think in 5 turns where am I going to be at with my Lost Zone and my energies. It's a lot more efficient to just play every turn. Let's see which attacker I use now, right?
Right. Like when I play against Lawson, to me it feels like they have to make so many more like decisions and make sure that they do everything right and plan ahead just to get kind of the same matchup that I already have. Like, so I feel like Lugia, like there's definitely lots of opportunities to make good plays, but like you aren't usually just gonna lose the game instantly by making one small error, which with Lawson because of like how much different resources and stuff there is in it, it can definitely be a problem. So I feel like making sure you like playing a deck that's like super hard just because it's like hard and there's a lot of decisions to make, I don't think is always the best decision. Just trying to pick a deck that consistently works well, and then there's sometimes room to make really good plays. I think is a lot of times a better
Yeah, that makes
choice,
a
at
lot of
least for
sense.
me.
For sure. Yeah, I mean and we've seen even just in terms of the results that Lost Box has, the players who are succeeding with Lost Box tend to be the players who are consistently succeeding with Lost Box. I mean, there's always kind of the jokes that at every regional there's just kind of a random player in top 8 with Mew who just kind of kept flipping heads on
Right,
their crams, but the Lost Box players, it's always Azul, it's always Nick Moffat, it's always that group of players because it's a very difficult deck to play.
right. I agree. And I feel like yeah, like again, a lot of times it's just better to play a deck that's, has room to make good plays, but it's not every turn you have to make every single play. Some
Yeah.
big perfect play. Yeah.
Now, outside of these pretty amazing wins you've had in the last couple weeks, is there a tournament that kind of stands out to you in the past as kind of the most memorable one in your experience as a player, maybe even in seniors? Something that really stands out to you as an event you've really enjoyed?
I think maybe the seniors regionals that I managed to get top four with Taboo Bulu, I was definitely really excited for that because going into that, I think that was maybe my second regional ever. And I definitely wasn't expecting to be able to make it to top eight. So it was definitely really, really fun to do that. And like, I guess maybe that kind of gave me my first boost of confidence that I could actually play at a regional level, even though it was just in seniors.
Hmm. I mean, some seniors are quite talented nowadays. I mean, we see Grant Shen, who's in his second, maybe first, like full proper year of Masters, and he is top eight everywhere.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a good amount of good seniors too, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, even with OCIC, Reagan being in the finals, right?
Right. And I faced Reagan in top eight of Orlando as well. He's
Exactly.
definitely done good this year too.
Definitely a very talented player. When it comes to the rest of the season, you already mentioned EUIC is something you were able to get registered for. What other events are you looking forward to being at this season?
So I just booked a flight to Charlotte. I'll be at Fort Wayne. That one I can drive to pretty fairly easily. USC. I'll be at Milwaukee because that's another one I can drive to pretty easily in the Midwest, and NAIC for sure as well to close out the year. There's a chance, like depending if I'm trying to get some stipend thing or top 16, depending on where the standings are, I could end up booking another of the ones in May. But right now, I think those five.
Okay. Now, I do have a question that was submitted by a listener, which is, what is more difficult, regionals or Chicago 1Ks?
Well, my record at Chicago 1Ks is worse than my record at regionals for sure. So I don't know. I feel like Chicago 1Ks definitely can be pretty difficult events. But regionals are pretty difficult too. You face good players at both of them, to be honest. So
It's a tough beat for Lugia players when you're playing Doral on every other round, right?
yeah. Also one of the other things like some of the small like best of one is definitely not quite as reliable as best of three. Definitely enjoy the best of three aspects of regionals. I
Hmm.
don't think there was any rounds that I completely was able to do nothing my entire round in multiple games. So I do like being able to play best of three. It feels a little bit better.
Yeah. Does that affect your deck building decisions in any way? I know that was kind of a big issue with Palkia last season, where every 3 games Palkia would just brick, and you at least you had best of threes to kind of clean up those other 2 games, but best of ones could be a little bit shaky. Does that affect your deck building choices or deck choices at all?
Um, I don't know. I definitely like no, I don't have to make my deck 100% consistent or whatever, but I really try to make my deck, pretty consistent, like reasonably consistent while still having options. Because like even you prefer not to lose any games to just bricking because you prefer to be able to lose one game. If your opponent pulls off some big play or maybe you make a mistake or something, you don't just want to instantly lose the set. So it's still good if you can try to give yourself a chance to set up every game. But if you miss like every couple sets, you have a bad game, you can make up for it in best of three.
For sure. Now, as we start to wrap up, is there anyone in particular you'd like to shout out for support?
Uh, I would say shout out to all the people who I've tested with recently, and also shout out to the car who drove up to me with Knoxville. That was definitely a fun experience
Who
for
was the
sure.
who was the 12-hour driver, or did you guys switch off?
Uh, yeah, there was a few people driving for sure, but definitely an interesting car ride. It was a lot of fun.
I can imagine. 12 hours is quite the slog sometimes through the cornfields.
Yeah.
If anyone is interested in following you and seeing how you're doing, where can people find you?
I guess the main place I talk for Pokemon's on Twitter at PokeHawkeye. That's the main social media I use for Pokemon.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to Andrew for being so generous with his time. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you're interested in hearing more conversations like this one, please consider giving us a follow, review, or rating wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at memcappodcast, or if you want to follow me and see my TCG experiences, you can follow me on Twitter at RZGladys. Hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening.